We're Hardy and Michael Ford are coming. Ellen Wilkinson, the red flag, she is humming. We get around not as much as Dominic Cummings, even though he's driving blind. We are the Labour grassroots, where like-minded folk dwell. From countryside to city, it's warm and it's witty, the antidote to Pretty Patel. We are the Labour grassroots, time to raise a racket. The future is as bright as Crispin's red jacket. This is the space where we all go hell for leather, free from all the biased BBC blether. Like track and trace, we're better together, just ask Harry and Meg. Yeah, we got all the people from Inverness, Skegness, Barrow, Inverness, Chester, Leicester, Cirencester, Shrewsbury, Oswald Street, Swansea, Hernackley, Barnsley, Beccles, Nottingham and Eccles. We are the Labour grassroots, time to plant some grass. Where we've always had social distancing between us and the upper class.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots. Now, this is a one-off show. I don't often do anything about clinical stuff because I'm not an expert on it. But my parents had their jab for COVID-19 in December, and they were so happy to have it, and they felt as though everything was going to change. And then about 2 weeks ago, or maybe less than that, a week and a half, my parents said they weren't going to have their second jab, and they were totally nonplussed and depressed about it. And to find out that they may have to wait 12 weeks for their next jab when they thought it was 3 weeks has really distressed them. And also, they're not particularly confident about what's being done. So, this is all for my parents, obviously, this show. I mean, I just do shows for my parents, but it's not really. My parents are not the only people who have this concern. And I don't think that it's been addressed by politicians or the media, really. So I thought we'd do a show about it, and I've tried to get as many people to come and speak as I can. I've invited the Labour Party front bench medical health team. None of them were willing to come on. So, but that isn't the end of it, because we've got two GPs who will be on the show later, and some clinicians. But to start the show, I wanted to speak to people who are concerned about what's happening with this delay to the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And I thought I'd start by speaking to Catherine in Newcastle, who's a regular on the show, is always coming on the show, and she's never spoken on the show, but she did fill in a survey and say she'd be willing to speak. So first time caller, Catherine. How are you doing, Catherine?
Hi, Crispin.
Could you tell me?
Second time.
Second time, is it? Oh well, it must have been a short one last time. But tell us your story about this delay to the vaccine, the second dose.
Well, Crispin, thanks for asking me to speak. Like a lot of people, when I first heard about the vaccine, I was absolutely thrilled. You know, oh, thank goodness there's a light at the end of this dark tunnel. And I was really excited about it. And the information that was coming out, and it was emphasised how important it is to have your first dose and then have your second dose 3 weeks later. And it was all perfectly clear. And also, you know, which order people would be in to be selected. And I knew that my parents would be at the top of the list. My father's 96 and my stepmother's 83. And they've had their first jab. But lo and behold, like yours, Crispin, they've got to wait, they've been told 10 to 12 weeks for their second jab. And I mean, I don't think that's good enough. It's been perfectly clear that for the Pfizer, at least, it does need to be a 3-week wait between jabs, and it shouldn't be any more. And Pfizer is still saying that. Now, I believe that the people at Oxford, I've been listening to lots of things on television and you know, on the radio, and listening to all sorts of so-called experts and various views. And it appears that the guys at Oxford are saying that actually a longer wait for theirs is okay, and in fact it could be beneficial, because it could make it stronger. You know, waiting a bit longer for the booster, that could make it stronger and more effective. But they're not saying that with Pfizer.
No, so can I just sort of interrupt? Yeah. What's the how do your parents feel? What's their how do they feel emotionally and, you know, psychologically about this
well, they do tend to go with the flow. They just take what's it's me that's getting angry about it. They just take what they're told. But I've told them that they're not to consider themselves as safe until they do finally get the second vaccine that's had time to set. And I've totally banned them from going to any raves or anything just yet.
Well, I'm pleased you've done that, because that would have been dangerous. And and the raves aren't open anyway. But anyway, thank you, Catherine. I'm going to move on to Nikki. Are you there, Nikki?
Yes, I am. Yeah. So I wanted to bring the perspective of someone who's been asked by the government to shield. Like so many people on the shielding list, I have a terminal illness, and lots of people have life-limiting conditions. So every delay caused by government incompetence really matters. So I've got no beef with the amazing scientists who developed these vaccines so quickly, and all the people who are volunteering to administer them. You know, it's extraordinary how quick they've done it, an amazing achievement. And I was just so happy when the Pfizer vaccine was authorized. You know, there was a light at the end of the tunnel for us. And then a few days later, I just disappeared into a pit of despair because I found out I couldn't have that Pfizer vaccine because of the problem with people having severe drug allergies. So I was holding on for Oxford or Moderna, and this is when the really unsafe policies started to kick in, not based on science, but just on, you know, crap Tory planning, basically. You know, there's no evidence that the 12-week gap is going to make a vaccine that, you know, gives us this 90-odd% protection that we need. 60% isn't enough for people that are shielding. We won't be able to leave the house without being terrified still. We won't be able to see kids and grandchildren. We really need that 90% protection. And then this pick and mix policy that they're floating about makes no sense, because these vaccines work in such different ways, and there've been no trials with, you know, mixing them up. They're only just training the volunteers to give the vaccine, which could have been done 6 months ago, you know, when they were doing the phase 3 trials. And I keep seeing terrible headlines like Minister says we should vaccinate those who can get to the vaccination centres more easily, you know, like the fit and healthy. And it just makes clinically vulnerable people think, okay, yet again, we don't matter. You know, our lives don't matter. I was one of the people that was asked to sign a DNR over the phone, for example. And there's been very little communication from the Department for Health and Social Care for us about vaccines. It's just recently, it's just a series of cock-ups, policy on the hoof. You know, depending on not science, but poor infrastructure, poor planning, and people are losing trust, and who can blame them, really?
Well, it sounds really bad, but I think that we've got a chance to resolve this if we all collectively work towards it. I don't think it should be allowed to make people feel this uncomfortable. So, well, thank you very much for speaking, and you know, I hope good luck with what happens. I'll speak to Robert now. Robert, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Great, okay. Yeah, I was just going to talk about the mixed experience of my mum. I'm a carer for my 92-year-old mum. We're lucky to be in a health authority that seems to have stuck to the science that came out of the vaccination trials. When Mum was offered the Pfizer vaccine so soon after it was available, she was excited, of course. The experience of having the jab was reassuring, but the leaflet given gave no information about how quickly it would work, and most importantly for her, how long it would last. So we returned to shielding. It was only on the news that this information was mentioned subsequently. And because it was mixed in with so many other facts, she started to become very confused due to her partial dementia. So 60% was the protection for Pfizer that we were told, from the first dose. I later discovered online what period of time before that took full effect. She got the date for her second booster the same time as the first, so she had the date in her diary, the other side of Christmas. Then came the fiasco of the U-turn on Bojo's promised family Christmas, and the hope for protection from the vaccine became a question whose answer was inevitably nothing has changed. When the news came about the proposed delay to the second jab, this added to her upset, of course. So I phoned the GP to be told that they did not know what would happen locally. The invite sent out by text was not from them. Then a text reminder for the second jab arrived. More confusion, but some hope. Another call to the GP confirmed that it was actually happening. So we turned up, and so it was. But meantime, the propaganda machine went into action. The BBC in particular justifying the change of plan. They launched no reality check on this issue, exaggerating the percentage protection and potentially misinforming about the efficacy of the delay, making it sound even a positive. And given the number of vaccines that were coming into play, it was actually quite difficult, I think, for a lot of people to, understand which vaccine was talked about. And I think for a lot of older people, a vaccine is a vaccine. So yes, this is all political, of course, far from the rigors of science, and not an outcome of the original trials. So, where do you go from here to reassure the elderly?
Yeah, we're going to work on finding a kind of resolution to this during the show. We have some clinicians on here as well as other people with some knowledge on this. Tony, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. For me, I've been watching the development of the vaccines because of necessity. My wife's got comorbidities and she's not been out since March, and I've shielded with her to keep her safe. And it matters for these people who are shielding that they get the vaccine and if it's going to work. But what we're now getting is a complete change to what the actual other vaccines were tested and the efficacies. I mean, you got the Pfizer BioNTech one, which is a 52% efficacy after the first dose, 95% after the second dose, and it's got 21 days. The other two work on 28 days. And the government's, once again, they've made a mess of everything, haven't they? They've made a mess of the track and trace system, and now they're making a mess of the vaccine system, and it's making people lose faith. And it's not just the fact that they're losing faith. A lot of these people are being shielded for 9 months, and now they can see there's a chance for freedom. But in reality, if the efficacy is not going to be high, they're going to be worried, and they're going to stay and remain shielding because they just don't think it's going to work. But one of the things, as I say, we know they've made a mess up of test and trace, this government, which they should still be using, but they've kind of forgotten all about it, and it's just about the vaccine now. And I feel now they've split it into two, and with the 12 weeks later, it's just all about the vaccine. They're becoming a one-trick pony again, and you know, I can see going tits up again. Quite honest with you, with the rest of it.
So you think they can't operate on different levels? They can only go for one solution all the time, and they can't handle. They can't do track and trace and a vaccine at the same time. It's just too much for them.
I mean, track and trace is still important, because that should be the mainstay. I mean, all the countries have been successful because they've used track and trace and have got people to isolate and have supported them. And now it's gone out the window. Not even Keir Starmer's mentioning it. And it's just no good because the vaccine alone isn't going to get us out of this at this time. You've got to have 80% of the population got to be inoculated. And it's going to take the stages. So in the meantime, it's still going to be spreading. The thing is, when you have your vaccine, you can still catch the virus and you can still share it with other people, even though it may not make you as ill.
Right.
It's just complete shit.
Well, yeah, I saw that word quite often in this survey. The word beginning with S, and anyway, I won't repeat it. But
no.
Anyway, thank you very much for coming on, Tony, and speaking.
No problem.
I'm going to speak to Jill. Are you there, Jill?
All right, so.
Not that familiar with Zoom, I'm afraid, but I think. Can you hear me all right?
I can, yeah.
Good.
So you actually wrote in. You thought, I don't think I've got anything to say because I'm not I'm not an expert, but I think your concerns and fears, we need to hear that. So tell us your situation, what you feel about how things are.
Well, I think I'll start by saying I had to have a COVID test on Sunday. Luckily, it came back negative, but it was a very frightening. It was a very frightening thing. I have asthma, and it was just a bad asthma attack that's been going on for about a week. It seems to me that most of the people in this country, or at least those with, so those who actually follow the matters under consideration, most of the people have actually just lost faith completely in the government being able to get anything right, or even having the will to get anything right. I don't think they've ever really stopped following the herd immunity policy. They've never, Hancock said the other day that he wasn't even considering aiming for zero COVID. And instead they're pinning all their faith on the vaccines, and the BBC is pushing this. I've been watching BBC News 24 quite a lot this week because mostly more because of the American elections. And today they had one of the scientists from Oxford on, and it wasn't made clear at all that she was talking about the Oxford vaccine being more effective after 12 weeks. The longer the gap, the better. it was framed to sound as though that was fine for the Pfizer vaccine as well. I just think, given the total muck up, I'll be polite, the total muck up the government has done at every single stage of this pandemic, I have no confidence whatsoever that they're not going to make a complete muck up of the vaccinations. And I think, you know, I'm scheduled to get mine, I think in about March, April time, but I've no confidence at all that it will be there. I've had to, I mean, it is personal, because I've had to move back from my support bubble. Now my granddaughter has started school, and even though my daughter and son-in-law are key workers, so Matilda's still at school, there's still quite a lot of children there, and I just think I want to be around for them when they're older, and not run the risk of one of the children bringing COVID home and sharing it with Granny. That sounds very selfish, perhaps, but I think it applies to an awful lot of grandparents who, it feels like even before I took this decision, when the new variant came up, it felt like playing Russian roulette every week with you know, a little grandson at nursery and a child at school as well. So I think, I mean, that as a layperson, that's how I'm feeling. And I just feel it's horrendous for the people who are, you know, sort of seriously ill and shielding, because it doesn't look as though there's any end in sight to this.
No, well, it does seem like that. But thank you very much again for coming on and telling us how you feel so honestly. And I'm moving on to Sandra Wyman. Are you there, Sandra?
Right.
Hi, Sandra.
Right, you've unmuted me. That's great. Thanks. Right, I'm shielding. I'm retired, so I don't have any worries about work. Though I did have to retire in my mid-40s, so to ill health, so there's not a massive amount of money about. So I've got quite a lot of time for reading stuff, which is basically how I kept myself informed. I have got an academic background, so I know the difference between folklore and something that can be trusted, if you like, or I think I do, though actually quite a lot of the information that comes out is absolutely horrendously confusing and not very reassuring to me, because I don't know how the vaccines are going to affect me. I have a condition in which one of the conditions I have is ME, and it's a case of my immune system being overreactive, which can in itself present dangers. I also have cancer, and was told by the cancer nurses that I should be very, very careful, because the two things together would put me in grave peril if I came into touch with COVID. So basically I've been shielding for months and months and months. I'd love to be able to go out, but I'm going to continue shielding. And the reason is that basically there have been two trials that have been sort of tested and recommended. The government isn't going with either of those. And they're not also, I mean, AstraZeneca's less in terms of its the amount of immunity it gives based on the trial. But they did discover during the trial that if they dosed differently, half a dose on the first one and a full dose 3 or 4 weeks later, that actually took immunity up to 90% plus. So that isn't being rolled out. The reason it's not being rolled out is because there hasn't been a trial of that, fair enough. But what is being rolled out is something that's based on hypothesis from one doctor, then publicized by Tony Blair, who is not any shade of epidemiologist. He has no expertise in that area, and which is now being foisted upon the community. I've had a letter from my doctor saying that because I'm in the extremely vulnerable category, I will actually have I have the option of mid-February. I haven't signed up for that. It didn't say whether there would be any choice about what I'd get, whether there would be any advice based on my condition and my vulnerabilities. Nothing that said, the fact I have allergies as well is also an issue, and they're not just food and medical allergies, they're fairly extensive. So that's on a personal basis. It infuriates me actually that what seems to be happening with this government is they are rolling out something that has not been tried and tested. It's based on hypothesis, i.e. it's a fancy word for guesswork. And to my mind, it has one particular purpose. And that purpose is to get people back to work so that they can save the economy. And I mean, actually, economies don't work like household budgets. They're very, very different. They use bonds and all sorts of, ways of making the money work. So the money can be there to support people through a bit longer to get something that actually works. And to roll it out in a way that people can trust, because there's not a lot of trust around these days, quite understandably. I mean, there's not actually a lot of trust in the Labour leadership either, actually. The people who are asking questions, and there's been a letter from a number of Labour MPs to the government asking a whole long list of questions, which are exactly the questions I asked. But the leadership isn't asking those. And that is scary too. It sort of it feels as if there's nothing on your side sometimes. Right. I think that's probably my 3 minutes now. So,
well, thank you very much. And I'm sorry to hear your situation. All these stories are really heartbreaking to hear. People who feel that they want to be out. I
am just going to go on shielding. I'm actually now fairly used to my own company, and I'm a bit introverted anyway. So. But it's safer.
Well, you can always come back on the Zoom show twice a week, and we'll give you a hug virtually.
So I've got a Labour Party support group. My local Labour Party has set up a support group for me, which is wonderful.
Great.
East North East is great.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to bring in David, who is he works in paediatrics in Chester. Are you there, David?
Yep.
Now I know you're ready to get for your night shift, and thank you very much for coming on. You're in the Socialist Health Association. Is that right?
Yeah, I am.
Now, can I just ask you what you think about the way the government's dealing with this whole pandemic? Because you've heard what people are saying about stuff. I mean, what would you like to say about it?
Well, I think an important point that's been raised a few times is the lack of trust due to the persistent changes in direction that don't seem to be science-based, don't seem to be evidence-based. And it's very important that that lack of trust in the government's handling doesn't diminish our trust in science and in the vaccines. I think a very useful point that was made earlier was that with the delay, people have been shielding for 9 months already. They may think that one vaccine is sufficient, then go out and start behaving more normally when they've still not fully been immunized. So it's important that until you've had your second vaccine, that you still keep behaving as if you're not protected. And sort of it would be irresponsible to start behaving as if you're fully protected after one vaccine, which is a danger, especially with a longer delay and with frustrations and with lack of trust and things. I also think that the lack of trust gives a space for people to start thinking conspiratorially and start thinking in terms of, doubting whether anything has been science-based. And I really hope that lack of trust in politicians doesn't lead to lack in trust in us as a medical profession, because it's not, or indeed in the scientists, because it's not necessarily related. In terms of the evidence, the very specific things that we know from the trials. There were certain protocols that were followed, and the trial only tells you really what's happened based on that. There are experts who have given their opinions, and you know, I'm no expert at all. I'm a paediatrician, general paediatrician, member of the Socialist Health Association. That's how I've ended up on this. I'm not an immunologist, so there are people who know a lot better than me on this. But it's important that, irrespective of our lack of trust in how the government might be handling things, that we don't allow that to diminish our trust in the actual experts who are speaking. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's that seems to be what I'm hearing, is people don't know what to trust, and they don't trust the government's success rate as well. So that's the other issue, is that what the government's done in the past with track and trace and other things has been pretty bad, abysmal. So they're thinking, well, why should they be? They're going to do it again. Why do we trust them on this? So
absolutely,
it's a really difficult situation. But I think it's important also, don't you, that we do have an open discussion, and it isn't shut down as a discussion. If there are concerns, people should be able to speak about them.
Absolutely, thanks for pointing that out. That's a really important point. People will have concerns, understandably. People always have concerns about a new treatment, a new development, and it's important that people seek the correct sources of information for that. So speaking to their doctors, speaking to, again, people who know. And if there's unclear messaging on that and unclear policies, that does lead to additional confusion, additional questions. And unfortunately, people then start to make links that perhaps aren't there. So I do totally agree with you that we need to give people the chance to speak, to give people the chance to ask their questions, to find out where the evidence is for the current policies, and not be shut down and accused of being, you know, negative, or being accused of being, indeed at the worst accusation, being anti-vaxxers, simply for having specific concerns about a specific vaccine at a specific time, because they're asking very direct questions about, is there evidence for this? And I think everybody should be allowed to ask that. As I say, I'm not necessarily the person who would be able to answer all of those, but we need to give a platform to the people who are.
Right, yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I know you've got a busy night ahead, so
yeah,
good luck. And when do you start? 8:30?
Yeah, I start at 8:30. So
all right, so we can all send some love to David before 8:30 while he's online. And thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to bring in Michelle, who is a chemist.
Yeah, I just want to differentiate that chemist as in laboratory chemist, not chemist as in laboratory chemist, but I've got my degrees in chemistry.
Okay, well, sorry. So what's your view on the way that, I mean, you probably know lots more than we need to know in a certain way, but what's your view on the way that this has been introduced as a policy change by the government and by the media as well, I suppose?
An entirely unilateral decision made by whatever. I don't even think Boris Johnson's capable of making a decision. He's just told that's what he's going to do. I think it's a political choice just to say, get some expert to say, that's fine. But there is nothing to back up. I mean, I have looked, and as far as I can tell, the trials, the MHRA haven't specifically given or published details about how the vaccines being accelerated. As I say, normally it could take about 5 years to get something released. And I can only see reports of up to phase 3. So it involves a minimum of 1,000 participants, up to about 3,000 participants. And then it would go on to phase 4 with hundreds of thousands of participants. And then that data can be built up over at least another year after phase 3, and then it can be released to the public. Obviously, there was a need on this case because, especially in the UK, it's getting worse and worse. And it's horrible to watch the news every day and they get so blasé about the number of people that have died. And the fact is, when everyone else had that little bit of, well, the vaccines are coming out. Yes, it's been quicker. Yes, there's a lot of unknowns, but there is some science to say that they will help. And at the moment, anything is better than nothing. When I always said it would be 3 weeks between doses, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, there could be a delay of up to 12 weeks. And it's like, because they want to vaccinate, give twice as many people the first dose and then not give them the second dose. Pfizer immediately released a statement saying, well, that's not what the trial has been set up to do. There is no backing up to say, is it still going to sustain the immunity? Are you going to be back to square one? Is it, you just don't know what you're going to do because there is nothing being tested. The data isn't there to see what effect that will have. That variable that was unilaterally put in by somebody in the government that they're going to do. No other country has adopted this approach, not even the United States, so it's very, very damning, and it's disgusting to treat the population the way they are treating them. At every stage, as Tony had said earlier, the lockdown too late, there's never been a proper lockdown, and now it's supposed to be locked down again, and there's still far too many people going about the business. I mean, I was made redundant in the end of September. I've been looking for other jobs. There's a few things out there, but at the moment, obviously, with homeschooling, I can afford to let a bit of a buffer just to take a seat back. And there was no way that my daughter was going to go back to school after Christmas anyway. I'd made that decision. And then, of course, right up until the day before, she wasn't due to start back on the Tuesday for her school. And then on the Monday, it was announced that no, there is going to be lockdown, when already schools had gone back for one day, when it was quite evident that had to happen. And it's the immediate refusal to do the right thing at every single stage. Now we've got this vaccine, and they're refusing to follow guidelines or the limited data that we have. At least let's follow it. Yes, it'll mean, you might mean, like, you got 2 million got the first dose instead of 1 million or whatever, how many number. But the ones that have got it, they've got it right. And in that case, they are immune. If they haven't got immunity, the first dose is no use because they still be going out spreading it. So we just don't know. I mean, It might work, it might not, but can we take that chance? Do you not want to just do it right for once? Just do one thing right? Yeah. And I've got very serious reservations that immunity will be lost, and then the people that have had the first vaccine will end up going back to square one. And that's basically, I'm not an immunologist, I'm not a epidemiologist or anything. or a virologist. I just, from a scientific point of view, you don't just willy-nilly, unilaterally make a change to the data that say a change to the conditions. If you've got a procedure or a method, or in this case, that is the way the drug is administered or vaccine is administered, you don't start changing it saying, that'll be fine. I mean, why not give him...
It sounds chaotic the way you've described it. I've got to move on. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks for letting me on now.
That's all right. Let's speak to Claire now. Claire has some drug development experience in that. Is that right, Claire?
Yeah, I'm a nurse and a researcher. My work's more sort of qualitative and sociological and all that sort of thing, but I work in a clinical trials unit, and I used to manage one, so I know a fair bit about sort of drug development and how you gain licenses and, participant consent and that sort of thing. I do have concerns about the safety and efficacy myself, which there's so little known about the virus and even less known about the vaccine, and so hopefully these things will be things that will I will be reassured about in time. But I suppose my biggest concern was the government's of interference, really. I mean, the MHRA would have given licenses to these vaccines on the evidence of their studies. So that would have been 3 weeks or 4 weeks apart, whichever drug company it was coming from. So these will be given off license if they're given as much as 12 weeks apart. Now, drugs are often given off license, but I've only ever seen that being done when it's an individual patient basis and and by clinicians. And this is basically the government stepping in and deciding that these drugs should be given off license, globally or nationally. And that is quite a worrying development, I think, and sets quite a precedent. Also, the 12-week thing is quite extreme. I mean, I know that France and I think Canada tonight have said that they will give the drugs 6 weeks apart. And certainly with the Oxford drug, there is evidence coming in to say that sort of that, to give it a bit longer is okay. But I couldn't find any research that looked at it beyond 12 weeks. And the trouble is, if we say 12 weeks, then if people are on holiday or, it's a bank holiday or whatever, it'll go to 13, 14, 15 weeks. And all of that time, it's just, adding more uncertainties to the efficacy and things like that. So, I mean, from all the people who've spoken, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of concern. I know my uncle was offered the vaccine. Fortunately, he had the second one 3 weeks later, but he was told that he might not, and it created a lot of fear, a lot of distrust. The greater period between the vaccines will obviously mean that more people will actually get the disease, which could undermine the whole sort of vaccination program and people's trust and all the rest of it. And it's this sort of government interference and dabbling in sort of professional, medical knowledge and that sort of thing that I'm just concerned about. And I think it sets a precedent for goodness knows what in the future, really.
Yeah, I mean, so it may be this might not be a disaster, but it will maybe set a precedent for a future disaster.
This is it,
where they interfere.
Yeah, this is my concern, definitely.
There. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be kind of guidelines that are adhered to, or otherwise it's chaotic and things will go wrong. Thank you very much for coming on, Claire. And I'm going to move to David. Are you there?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Crispin.
Now you're a researcher, and you think that we should actually just trust the vaccine company, the people who produce the vaccine, and that would be your preferred way of doing it?
Well, as you know, I have actually sort of changed my mind on this issue a little bit since you first got in touch with me, because I think, like most people, when I heard that the government was actually changing its plan about when the second dose gets administered, I thought, oh God, they're cocking this up as well, just like they've made a mess of everything else. And in particular, of course, there were voices from overseas, Anthony Fauci, for example, saying he didn't see that there was a good reason to do this. But having actually now had the chance to sort of read some of the literature on this, and I noticed someone had actually put there was a BMJ article on this topic in the chat. I actually do think it is defensible, the sort of change of plan around this, because what you've got to remember is that, first of all, there is just a limited amount of vaccine. We can't produce enough vaccine, immediately for the entire world. And we haven't even talked about other countries where some of them are not getting it at all. The UK is, of course, one of the first countries actually to be vaccinating its populations. So the problem is, how do we keep, we've got this virus that's rampaging around the country, largely because of the government's incompetence. Yeah. How do we stop the NHS wards being filled up with sick people, which is exactly what's happening at the moment? And if we don't administer, if we sort of don't try to ensure that as many people as possible can be vaccinated. That's basically what's going to happen. So that's the conundrum. Other people have pointed out that the AstraZeneca team have actually examined the time intervals between the two doses, and it seems that making it a longer interval actually improves the efficacy after the second dose. And Andrew Pollard from the Oxford vaccine team has also pointed out that's usually what does happen with vaccines. So, for example,
is it not a different type of vaccine though? They work differently, don't they? The Pfizer one and the Oxford one.
Well, that's one of the sort of areas of uncertainty, shall we say? Because that is actually using a new technology. But what you've also got to remember, of course, Pfizer are producing their vaccine for profit, whereas AstraZeneca are doing it at cost. And so, it's in Pfizer's interest to, push as many of their sort of product as possible. It does seem that, usually with vaccines, a longer interval between the two doses is helpful. I think some of us may be looking for levels of uncertainty that we're never going to achieve. So, even when you've had 2 doses of the vaccine, it's no guarantee that you're completely protected. We must remember that. It improves your chances, of course. But even with the AstraZeneca team, the longer interval was associated with 65% efficacy. The shorter interval was 53% efficacy. So, we're not talking about 100% efficacy, whichever way you look at it. So I do think, one question you might want to ask is, bearing in mind that longer interval seems to be better for sort of most vaccines, why did the government not go with that in the first place? I think it's the change of mind which is upsetting so many people. And of course, the BMA are unhappy because it causes logistical difficulties for GPs who've now got to sort of send out new letters to sort of their older patients and so forth. But I do think the idea of giving some level of immunity to as many people as possible probably is going to be helpful for helping the NHS until we have further batches of the vaccine coming in, at which point we'll be able to give the second doses.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I appreciate you've gone through a whole what do you call it, conversion about this issue. So it's interesting to hear you. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to speak to Sabine, who is in London, but
no, not in London. I live in Keighley, West Yorkshire.
Oh, in Keighley. Sorry. I should have known. It's your Keighley accent that I should have got that.
Yeah.
So you wrote in to say that your brother is a clinician in Germany, and what do they think about GP. What do they think about what's happening here?
The delay is sort of basically seen as, if you want to play Russian roulette, there are less painful ways of doing that. The other issue is Pfizer sort of said there is sort of this leeway between 3 weeks and about 42 days or 6 weeks on the outside. And so you could sort of freeze in the part of the vaccine and sort of basically vaccinate with each lot about, say for example you have 2,000, you sort of vaccinate 3,500 and put 1,500 away type of thing. But they were sort of saying, if you go beyond the time they advise, there is basically no responsibility for them to basically be responsible for it, because you have broken the terms of how you should apply the vaccine, right? That's one thing. So could we sort of sue for compensation if things go drastically wrong? There is the issue, if you have lots of people who are vaccinated, partially vaccinated going around, you might find more mutations of virus kind of thing as well. and they sort of say any time between 3 and 6 weeks to vaccinate for the second shot. That is okay, because you take some time to get the initial kind of things and then the booster as well.
Right.
So, and you cannot go out on raves basically after you had the vaccination. You need at least 3 weeks or thereabouts to get the basic immunization set up. But if you're only partially done or safe, then it's no use really going out. And he was sort of saying, because him and me, we listened to a podcast on the Corona update, which is done by North German radio, and it sort of has as contributors Christian Drosten, and who works at the Charité, and a lady called Sandra Czizek, who is at the Klinikum in Frankfurt. And they're both virologists. That's sort of the situation. The other thing could be an ethical issue if you sort of assume that people are fine to be guinea pigs for different approaches which have not been researched, and any kind of license was given on the research done to date.
Okay.
That's it. That's what people feel like.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear a perspective from people in Germany. I know that in America they're not keen on following what's happening here, and other countries as well. I've read
exactly.
Are not interested.
They don't do that. Even in America they don't do that with the 12 weeks.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on now to Mike in North London. I know he's not in Keighley. He's in London. Mike, you there?
How you doing, Crispin?
I'm good. Now, what you wrote in to say you wanted to speak on this? Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any medical expert knowledge to bring to bear, so I wanted to foreground some of the political stuff, if I could, for a couple of minutes. I mean, here's one thing that strikes me. Because of the fast development of the vaccine, we don't know how long its effectiveness lasts. There's a lot of discussion about how long should you have the gap between the doses, but because of the fast development, how long is the actual vaccine effective? So we shouldn't be putting all our eggs in the basket of a vaccine that immunizes people for life or for years on end. We still need an effective test and trace system, and 10 months on, we're nowhere near having an effective test and trace system. We're in a situation 10 months on where only 3% of incoming travellers into Britain, who only 3% of them are contacted by anybody after they've been told to self-isolate. And it seems to me that these are political failings that we should be highlighting. There was a poll this week, you know, we're all sitting here saying, oh, the government has failed, the government has failed. There was a poll this week that said that 58% of people believe that the reason for the pandemic spreading exponentially is the fault of the public, and only 28% of people blame the government. That should be a wake-up call, because we can sit here and blame the government as much as we like, but that's not the way it's portrayed in the media. The same media that one minute runs vaccine skeptic and lockdown skeptic articles by people like Toby Young, and then blames people for not observing the rules, which have changed virtually every 3 or 4 days, scores and scores of times, and yet unsung a huge amount of public goodwill to actually get through this, that was there in the first lockdown, before all the double standards of people like Dominic Cummings became exposed and the way in which the Tories were helping their mates in the private sector, but also the huge amount of goodwill you see in mutual aid groups, you see in the volunteers that are helping get the vaccine done. People are very, very willing to trust and get this thing done. The level of take-up is huge compared to other countries like France. You've got people queuing around the block in some health centres, people putting on their finest clothes because they realise that getting this vaccine is a big deal for them and it's an important achievement. And yet we're still getting in a situation where the polls suggest that people are blaming other people as a matter of individual responsibility rather than the government and its failings. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think the level of opposition and holding the government accountable and calling it to account has been abysmal. And if the opposition spent less time trying to triangulate between what different groups are saying and focusing on the principles of being science-led and getting behind the unions as well, when they've been science-led, like the NEU on the school closures issue, who were ahead of the curve, and finally the government had to cave. If we saw some effective scrutiny opposition, I think people wouldn't be blaming the public in the way that they are. They'd be blaming the government. That's all.
Oh, thank you very much, Mike. Very good point about the failings of the government in general, not just on this. We have to look at the bigger picture. And in fact, to open up the discussion a bit more, I'll speak to Sue in North London, in Islington, quite near to Mike. You there, Sue?
Yes, very near Mike. I wanted to talk because I'm a local councillor. In fact, I'm responsible for the pandemic response in Islington. And I wanted to talk about what councils could do, or what councils can do, because I'd like to encourage you all to be pushing your councils to do some of the things that I think we're doing that are getting it right, if you like. And I think that's really important for those of us in the Labour Party, because frankly, in England, the only place where people will see what Labour can do in government is in their local authorities. And sometimes when we talk, for example, about the Red Wall and the failings there, I think sometimes people don't look at the role that the pretty poor local councils in some of those areas played in losing us those areas. So I want to say, just to talk about the things you can push your local council to do in terms of supporting vaccination and getting it actually happening. And the first of those is this issue about the massive vaccination sites that the government is proposing, the mass vaccination sites, which are miles away from many people, impossible to get to if you're trying to travel in the middle of a pandemic and you're elderly or vulnerable or whatever. Local councils, certainly mine, have worked extremely hard to find the right sites which to deliver vaccinations. We found one in the middle of our borough. That's the place where we have the largest number of bus stops, and we're ready to go, but we're waiting for government to actually, get us the supplies and organise the logistics. Needless to say, when you destroy industry in the country, it ends up that it's rather difficult to produce vaccines in time. And when you rely on the private sector for your logistics, it usually doesn't work. So we've been working also with local surgeries to find them the space to deliver vaccines if they haven't got space to deliver them successfully. And now I'm working on quite an important programme, which is talking to as many different community spaces as possible to think about mini vaccination sites as soon as they become possible, so that we can start to get to people who maybe are reluctant or are not getting the right information. And certainly, first in the queue have been a couple of our local mosques who've got the space and would love to be vaccination centres. So you should be asking your local authorities to do that. Secondly, your local authorities must work with those communities. Those very same people who are being blamed for for not doing lockdown properly and things like that are the key to actually managing to keep everybody safe and keep the maximum number of people alive in your area. We're doing meetings. I do a weekly meeting for anybody who's involved in organising community groups, tenants associations, faith communities. We have local councillors in them as well. And it's a place where they can talk to our public health people, find out the latest information, air their doubts, have the sorts of discussions we're having today. And it's where we can listen and also get ideas from people about how it is that we can get more messages across so that people get good information, decent information, but information from people they trust, their neighbours, people who look like them, people who speak the same language as them. We're training people to do little handheld videos. You put your phone in front of your face, explaining the key public health messages so that people understand what's going on in the area and what they can do to keep themselves safe and what the vaccine is and things like that. We're even looking at a sixth form college doing more amusing TikTok videos and things to encourage young people and so on. And the last thing is that you need good public health professionals, and certainly the information I get from them I trust, because they're public health professionals who believe that actually it's the social stuff that determines health as much as all of the kind of, extra sort of scientific stuff. They believe in the social determinants of health, and they believe that it's the role of public health and local government to tackle inequalities and disproportions in local areas. It was our public health people, for example, who told us about school spreading being one of the major causes of the spread of the virus, that led us then to, to give advice to schools to close, that then led the government to threaten us, and then led the NUU and other local authorities and so on into eventually forcing that U-turn on schools. So, and the other place where the local authorities can play such an important role is in track and trace, and we should be demanding that it just be devolved to local authorities, and that we get the money back from all of the shysters and parasites who've been taking the money off us for doing very, very little indeed. I think if we have local government actually working with, absolutely closely, working with, listening to, communicating with and empowering local communities. We work very closely with organisations like Mutual Aid and so on. Then that is what will get us through, and that's the way we need to deliver the vaccine, and that's how we need to deliver clear messages about what's actually working with the vaccine. In truth, my public health people say much what David Hardman was saying, which is, yes, it's a way. If you're looking at it as a public health thing, then actually it's important we get as many people vaccinated as possible, but we also need to give them the message that they're not safe until they've had the second dose, and they need to be careful after that as well, because we are still in a situation where the pandemic is raging and where it is going to be very easy to get infected and so on.
Okay.
So, sorry.
Well, thank you, Sue. That's very thorough. We know exactly what's going on in local government. Thank you very much for that. Before I bring in we have two clinicians at the end of this discussion. I'd just like to bring in Shaista, who is working for Status Now and helping refugees. Are you there, Shaista?
I'm here. Yes. Hello.
And so, what's happening with refugees in this country and vaccination?
Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shaista, and I'm here representing Status Now for All in Manchester. Now, since COVID-19 emerged, Status Now for All has been organising around our call for indefinite leave to remain to ensure equity of access to healthcare, housing, and food. Now we've joined vaccines to all of that, irrespective of whether someone wants or does not want the vaccine. Everyone must have equitable access to it. Everyone in the UK that is able to get vaccinated needs to get the vaccine to help the nation achieve herd immunity from the coronavirus, and that includes the millions of undocumented immigrants countrywide. Now, as the government is telling us the vaccine will be publicly available, our question is, when will this be happening, and how can this vaccine be made available to the public if certain sectors of the UK population are being excluded? Now, the vaccine becoming available in the NHS does nothing to address any of the structural, institutional, and systemic barriers to access to health for people who are undocumented and those, of course, in the legal process. Blocking undocumented workers from COVID vaccines will be a moral and public health disaster. We don't know how many undocumented workers there are in the UK, but they could be well over 1 million, and there are only 66 million in the UK. 66 million people in the UK, sorry. Now, undocumented workers should in fact be at the start of the vaccination lines, arguably because they are especially vulnerable because many are at work in essential industries, therefore required to work outside of their homes, and because they may be in poorer overall health since they are cut off from public health services. When we look at the national discussions that have been going on among public health officials, it can be agreed to a certain extent that this is something which we must tackle as a full society. We need to deal with this as a community and try not to create divisions. Many of these undocumented people might avoid getting the vaccine for fear of endangering themselves or even their families and sometimes even their communities. In order to ensure all members of the population are safe and protected, it is absolutely crucial that these undocumented people be vaccinated.
Right.
Recently, sorry, just a few more words. Recently, representatives from Status Now for All attended a GLA meeting with Public Health England, and several people in that meeting asked similar questions about undocumented access to vaccination, but it was felt as if this question was being avoided, maybe deliberately. Unless the NHS agrees open access, it's feared that many will not be vaccinated. In our open letter to the government recently, Status Now states that in the interest of basic humanity and public health, undocumented people must be able to access the COVID-19 vaccination without fear of reprehension.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good to see you again. And I am going to bring in a GP who works in Liverpool, Dr. Ryan Young. Are you there, Dr. Young?
Hello, hi there.
Hi. Have you managed to? So thank you for staying so long. Have you managed to hear everything that was said on there?
Yes, yeah.
And
Really
you're
good.
from the Socialist Health Association as well.
Yeah, that's right.
What have you picked up from what people have said?
So I think there's a lot about trust, and I think we're in the woeful situation we are in, and that is wholly responsible at the door of the government, and there can't be any other way of looking at this. There is a huge range of understandable concerns with regards to the vaccine, and I do understand them, and I do understand that there's no evidence for the change to 12 weeks. I think in medicine there often is lacking evidence for certain decisions that we make, certain things that we do, and at that point we move on to expert opinion. And I think I point out I'm not an expert, so I'm a specialist in homeless health, drug and alcohol addiction, and asylum health through freedom from torture. So this isn't my area of expertise. But the JCVI, so the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisations, this is made up of the country's leading experts on immunology and on virology. So these are the people. So and their decision with regards to this vaccine and delay. So it is their decision which has maybe influence from the government. I can't answer that question, but it is supported by other specialities within medicine. So the Royal College of GPs, Royal College of Nursing, the Joint Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, so that there is support and confidence in the decision by the country's leading virologists and immunologists. And I feel that I don't have the expertise to wholly go against their decision.
No, I don't want you to say anything that you don't want to say. So I'm not going to lead you into that. But what did you think about the this idea that it's a dangerous precedent to change advice of a medicine, and that if this happens again, it could have a bad result? Do you think that should have been addressed by the government or their message in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the messaging with this has been completely wrong. There's no trust in what's being said, and so people understandably have concerns. I think the lateness of the decision, and then the decision not to honour those who've already had a first vaccine, which was changed. Liverpool, where I am, we tried to honour the second dose, but have recently been changed to not being able to honour that dose. So I think there's a lot of issues around the communication, around the decisions, the suddenness of them. And I think that better communication and communication from scientists as well to explain their rationale would help the situation measurably.
Just one other thing. Somebody sent me an email today saying that actually the government are allowing local, is it primary care units or networks to set their own decision on this, that there are actually people who have received a second vaccine, so it isn't as clear as a national decision. Is that right?
So initially that was the case.
Oh, it's changed now.
So the Liverpool networks made a decision they were going to honour the second dose, and I think a number of other networks, I don't think it's unique to Liverpool, but then that decision was changed, I think a couple of days ago, or maybe slightly longer, that the government then said you can no longer honour you can no longer stick this decision to honour the second dose.
Oh, right. So they came in then when they realised. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on and listening to everyone, and we all appreciate you spending your time here. Thank you so much.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Cheers. I'm now going to come on to David Wrigley, who's the Deputy Chair of the BMA and a GP in Carnforth in North Lancashire.
Yeah.
Hi, David. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Now, you've heard everyone's concerns, and worries and also their mistrust of the government. Do you think the government is making this decision really difficult for themselves because of their past behaviour? And also, what do you think about this idea that it's a dangerous precedent for the government to effectively change what a vaccine's instructions were for the manufacturer?
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for inviting me. And it's great to hear and listen to all the stories. It's really humbling to hear what's happening. And so I'm a GP in Carnforth in North Lancashire. And we're actually rolling out the vaccine programme now. We've had clinics every day for the past week, and it's actually been quite heartening to do that. And we're getting all our older, frail patients in to vaccinate them. And so that's a real positive, I think. And I'll come on to some of the aspects around that. I think we have to remember, before this pandemic, the NHS was not in a great place at all already. We have some of the lowest number of beds per population in Europe. We have a shortage of around 10,000 doctors, probably around 90,000, 100,000 nurses short. So, you know, this was going into a pandemic with the NHS in a really difficult place, and morale was already at an all-time low. But, you know, the last year now has been unprecedented. And obviously, I'm deputy chair at the BMA. We represent doctors as a union. We're the trade union for doctors across the UK. We have 160,000 members, and we really just haven't stopped since last March. You know, the whole profession has gone all out to support our patients, to go the extra mile, and try and look after our patients in what is a dreadful pandemic. This dreadful virus is really ripping through the country. And we've had a government really response that has been woeful. We've had mess upon mess along the way. Firstly, we had a lockdown that was too late. And if you remember the PPE crisis, the BMA called that out, and I myself called for industry to be repurposed when all the factories had closed down to make PPE. Fell on deaf ears. We're importing PPE from across the world. Often some of it never came. You may remember the BMA was one of the first that called out why so many BAME doctors were dying. The first 10 doctors to die were from BAME, and that wasn't really challenged. You know, we had the schools, flip-flop problems, massive problems with schools, and the BMA has been really concerned about the use of the private sector as well during this crisis. Billions of pounds given to private companies, often with no oversight or ability to scrutinise these contracts. So we're now coming to the vaccine time, and you know, we've got great concerns around the supply and the stock of vaccine. It's just impossible to find out from government what stocks there are in the country, what they've ordered. So as I say, I'm leading the rollout of vaccine delivery in my area of practice, which is 25,000 patients. And I only found out today what vaccines we're getting next week. As we speak now, I'm talking to my practice manager on WhatsApp and setting up clinics for next Tuesday to get patients invited in, because we get so little notice. You know, this is how chaotic it is, and the BMA is taking it to the very highest level to just find out what is going on with this vaccine supply and delivery, because, you know, GPs are absolutely expert at delivering vaccination programs. We do it all the time. Every year we do millions of flu jabs. You know, I've got practices near me that could quadruple their output of vaccines. They're desperate for more vaccine, but they can't get it. It falls on deaf ears, and you just don't hear any more about it. So, you know, this really does need sorting out at the highest level. Now, I hear that AstraZeneca is ramping up its supply, and we should be getting much more of it coming through within weeks, really. So that is good news, because it's a much easier vaccine to handle and deal with. As GPs, we could take it out to people's homes and deliver it very easily, whereas the Pfizer one is much harder to supply to patients, because you have to store it and use it within 5 days. So we're hoping we'll get more of the AstraZeneca. But, you know, this delay of the second dose, it caused mayhem. So I had GP colleagues who'd got thousands of patients booked in for the second dose, who started before Christmas, just told just one night, I'm sorry, you'll have to cancel them all by the government and just get on with it. And they were just they couldn't believe what they had to do. And they had the staff were on their knees. They had to go in at over New Year's Day, they were phoning patients up to cancel the second dose. And these are elderly, frail, over 80-year-old patients who often have dementia or other problems, and trying to explain to them that they can't have the second dose. So we pushed really hard for those second doses to be honoured. And on the whole, we managed to do that until around, I think there'll be no second doses, certainly from today. Some did carry on last week, as we heard in Liverpool, but there's absolutely no discretion now. You can't give second doses. So we're on to first doses for everyone. Just to talk briefly about one dose, it does give you really good protection. If you have one dose, around 90% protection from serious COVIDs, and that means admission to hospital and ITU admission. So there is some good news there. One dose does prevent you from getting seriously unwell, but the BMA is calling for that second dose to be delivered, as soon as possible. Certainly for healthcare workers, we're concerned. Obviously, as a doctors' union, we want to make sure doctors are protected to look after patients. So we've called government out and said we want to see all healthcare workers given their second dose by the end of January, so that we're able to then care for our patients. And of course, patients should get the second dose as soon as possible as well. There's a lot about the data, and AstraZeneca their studies did show that you could wait a bit longer for that second dose. So I think that's okay with AstraZeneca, but for Pfizer, the study didn't go beyond 21 days. And that's why you're seeing America and other countries saying, you've got to have your second dose at 21 days. But our scientists and experts have said that we want more people to have one dose, so others will have to wait for the second dose. And I'll end now in case you want to come back, but there's one stat I'll give you. For every 100 doses, one dose, in the over 80-year-olds, you save one life. So, we gave 1,300 doses at the weekend to our oldest patients. So we saved 13 lives at the weekend. Now, you could argue, if I give out a second dose next week, that's one less dose for an elderly patient. So, I think this needs to be laid at the door of the government, but we're trying to do this to save most lives. But I fully accept it leaves you in a very difficult position, worried, concerned, shielding, and I'm really sorry for that, but we're just trying our best for our patients, and the NHS is doing its best for you all.
Yeah, well, I think what we've heard is that the government's been running this so poorly that it's almost put the pressure on this thing to be this decision to be made to delay the second dose because of the track and trace and all the other things that they failed on. They're now putting it on these people like my parents who were overjoyed they were getting this injection, and then they now just don't know what's going on, and they're quite fearful and also demoralized. It's just psychologically to think I'm going to be a bit more liberated now, and then to be told on New Year's, New Year's Day, that week, no, sorry, you can't be confident of doing that. I really appreciate you coming on, and I think that the main thing I've got from this is I feel such gratitude that you came on, and I'll tell you why. I've written to about 20 GPs and doctors. I've written to the whole of the Labour Party health team, and none of them wanted to talk about this. And that's a problem. Not discussing it, I think, is a massive problem. Do you think that there should be, if you'd like to come in, do you think that we should have more debate and discussion on this, or do you think the way they're doing this is right, where they just shut down debate?
I mean, we need more debate about how the government has responded. I mean, a public inquiry will come, but whether that will shine a light on all the major problems that we've seen over the years. And we've had to. I mean, I was very prominent in campaigning against the Health and Social Care Act back in 2010, 2012, and that's just been a disaster for the NHS about outsourcing, austerity, and privatisation. And this has led us to where we are now with an NHS that was on its knees at the start with a lack of beds, doctors, and all the healthcare workers are, really just chasing their tails every day. And we weren't prepared for a pandemic, despite all that you hear from the government. So, we need to shine a light on them. I hope the Labour Party do as well. I'm a Labour Party member, but I really hope the Labour team do shine a light on all the incompetences we see, at the very top of government, and all the issues of laid out to you here already. The BMA has done a lot of work, and we produced a very lengthy document on outsourcing and privatisation as well. I'll put a link in the sidebar to it, which it's just unbelievable what they've done, and how they literally sent a message out to MPs and peers to say, are any of your mates involved in PPE and logistics, because we'll give them contracts. And it beggars belief, doesn't it? And this is happening right under our noses now with our taxpayers' money. So we've really got to highlight these issues more and more, and certainly the BMA will be doing that as much as they can. BMA is not party political, as you know, but we're quite happy to shine a very bright light on any government that doesn't look after the NHS, which is one of the most amazing institutions and remains revered around the world despite all the problems and underfunding that we see.
Thank you very much, David, and good luck with your massive vaccination program. Rob, you haven't written another song, have you?
I have. I was interested in the subject, so I had a little think about it, and I thought that probably there was lots of examples lots of examples that might justify just having one shot. So. Van Gogh was a genius, he didn't need both ears. Adolf only had one ball, but still was widely feared. There's only one Madonna, and Maradona too. So as to vaccinations, well, probably one will do. Probably one will do. Probably one will do. As to vaccinations, probably one will do. It didn't hold back Nelson losing arm and eye, and if you sell a kidney, you'll probably get by. And God was far too profligate designing me and you. You can hop on one leg, so probably one will do. Probably one will do. Probably one will do. Yes, you can hop on one leg, so probably one will do. Don't listen to the experts. Experts are never right. Be like our Prime Minister, talk bollocks, guff and shite. Don't follow the instructions if you haven't got a clue. Imagine two Matt Hancocks, probably one will do. Probably one will do. Probably one will do. Imagine two Matt Hancocks, probably one will do. Don't listen to the scientists. Tony Blair knows best. Let free market economists apply their acid test. What's good for the economy and wives and cronies too? More cutbacks and austerity, so probably one will do. Probably one will do. Oh, probably one will do. More cutbacks and austerity, please, so probably one will do. So off you piss, Oliver Twist, you won't get any more. The nanny's state of health and safety regs we just ignore. Just cut some corners here and there, it's what we usually do. Two heads might be better than one, but probably one will do. One may do, yes, probably one may do. Two heads might be better than one, but probably one will do. Probably one will do. Probably one will do. But what would really be ideal is one shot between two. Yes.